objective also related to development. I think we stepped away very clearly from the false dichotomy between security and freedom. Carl touched upon the statement that we brought out in The Hague around the global cyber security conference that the Dutch government put together, where basically the key recommendation was do not allow for the weakening of encryption, which is an ongoing discussion still in many societies, and that recommendation still stands in this report. And more broadly, when we think about how the rule of law should apply in the digital ecosystem, that we are very, very careful that it doesn't become a question of privatized law enforcement, where companies effectively set norms in the absence of governments playing their role, in the absence of global norms developing, which could go at the expense of people. I mean, we've been very concerned about avoiding the abuse of power or overreach by both states and private actors at the expense of people. And that has been, I think, the core sort of set of values that have informed us, because this trust and protecting people that are online or not yet online, but basically looking at people first is very, very important. A lot of trust has been lost, and if we're not careful, the benefits that the open internet could bring could be eroded if there is not enough reason to trust the infrastructure, to trust the services running on it, etc. In order to make that happen, there were some recommendations on how the so-called multi-stakeholder process can be more effective and more inclusive. It's become a bit of a jargon for those of you who are involved with questions around internet governance. It's difficult to talk about it without people highlighting the importance of different stakeholders coming together to make decisions, and we fully underline that, but we don't want this word to become some kind of hollow calling without giving it meaning, because just because everybody's at the table doesn't mean that everybody's heard and represented, doesn't mean that the people that are not at the table should not be brought in or should not take responsibility. So we focus very much on where states, the private sector, the technical community, civil society, and people are mutually dependent. So we're trying to look at where the common interest is, which of course in a hyper-connected reality should be part of our thinking, but risks being undercut by individual efforts by states or companies to bring the internet under their own control or to instrumentalize the open internet for their own goals of controlling people, making profits, cutting off certain areas for their own benefit. So this aspect of mutual dependence is central to the thinking in the report, and should really do away with the notion that there's always a zero-sum relation between security and freedom, security and rights, which we have seen too much of. And I think the fact that this report comes out that way also represents a shift in the thinking away from this zero-sum notion towards the notion of mutual dependence. And I really hope that that is the context within which we will see more leadership. Of course, I'm focused on the leadership Europe should provide, and I hope that we will work on that. Today or yesterday the global strategy was presented, which does not reflect sufficiently, I think, the future challenges and the challenges in the areas of cybersecurity and internet governance that I do believe Europe should lead in. But hopefully this report will also be read widely by the people across town at the External Action Service, at DG Trade, DG Connect, and other relevant places. And I hope that you will be part of a discussion, which is what this report wants to invite, but also to share what you think is relevant in order to make sure that we are part of that shift away from zero-sum to mutual space and mutual dependence. So thank you very much, Carl, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here, and I would now just like to open it up for questions and discussion. Don't be afraid. Yeah, I know. But then one starts and then it comes. Yes, very good. Okay, so.
Thank you, Mariette. Do I need a microphone or can I just?
You're good.
I
think okay.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you, Carl. Congratulations on getting this out. I'm wondering what comes next. In particular, even though you were clearly putting a positive recommendation-based set of ideas on the table, there's obviously some threats out there. What do you think the next attacks are going to be towards the open internet that you both described what's next? What do we need to do now that you've given us this lovely intellectual basis for moving forward?
Good question that we need to reflect upon. I think I'm rather worried by the tendency towards having the different data localization tendencies that we find all over the world, including in this part of the world. Although there are ways of dealing with it, there's no question that that sort of takes down the sort of value of the internet, and there's a risk of that going further to a direct fragmentation of the net if that happens. And I'm worried, to continue to what Marietje said, that there is a sufficient awareness in Europe of these issues. I mean, the Americans are on top of most of the issues, I have to say. The Chinese are on top of the issues from a slightly different perspective, if I phrase myself unusually diplomatic. While Europe ain't really there in the debate about these particular issues, and is struggling. I mean, it has been struggling with what is now going to be the Privacy Shield, I hope, has been struggling with the Data Retention Directive, has been struggling with issues without being able to form a coherent approach, which should be very much in the interest of development of the European economy. And you have here in the Parliament, I guess, an ongoing debate of the digital single market. That's fine, but that's only part of the story. That's a digital single market for Europe. That's not enough. The digital business is global. If I look at only from the Swedish perspective, the companies that we have, both established ones, if I take an Ericsson, which is the world leader in telecoms, or if I take the Skypes or the Spotifys or the Minecrafts or these sort of people making money these days, tons of money by the way. But if you say to them they're going to be restricted to Europe, they laugh at you. I mean, they go global immediately. So while the digital single market and the focus of that is important, I support it, it must be done, it's not enough. And that other global aspect has been, I think, missing in the European debate, and there's been an element of too much in the other direction, and that tends to play into the hands, to some extent, if I exaggerate slightly, in the hands of those that perhaps have other interests in mind when it comes to what they could call localization or might be the fracturing. Then I think there is a need for more debate in business on how to handle the trust issue. If you gather a lot of data about your customers, and effectively customers pay for the services that they get by delivering the data that the companies then sell and make business with. That's the business model for all of this. Fine, if people are sufficiently aware of it. And we have a suggestion, as a matter of fact, that there should also be the possibility to sort of buy these particular services without providing, well, we provide the data perhaps, but they should not be able to sell the data further on, provided that you should then pay for it. And here I think there will be a need for business to be much more aware of the concerns that will be there increasingly with customers on how their data are treated. And if that is not handled, there's a risk of a backlash that could lead to the further deterioration in the conditions for this. So those are some of the issues. Then, of course, we have, which Marietje alluded to, the cyber war issues, which are coming more and more to the forefront and must be handled on the level of states, norms for states, but also the different measures that you can take in order to protect yourself in different ways. And here there are sort of Brussels discussions, and there's the double Brussels discussions. You have discussion here, and then you have what I refer to as the suburbs, NATO, which also, of course, is engaged with these issues, although with a slightly more limited mandate, in the sense that they are focused on the security defense aspects of it, or the defense sector protection. The EU as such has not enough competence on the security side for a number of reasons, and accordingly we have, I think, not as good abilities here to deal with these issues as we should have.
I mean, maybe just to add, because I see more questions and I want to be brief, but my main concern is indeed the lack of European leadership, particularly on the global stage, but also lack of credibility because of, for example, anti-terror laws that are adopted quite easily, let's say, with major consequences. And there have been other incidents where the press has been hindered, or where there are proposals that are not well thought through, if you ask me, and don't contribute to the open internet. I think we have to have a serious discussion about whether or not there are going to be job losses as a result of more and more digitization. It is at least a fear that needs to be addressed as part of other fears related to globalization, and we can all see where discussions can lead if we don't address them adequately. So I think we have to be honest and be rigid about researching what could happen, whether there will be jobs created, which is what some people claim, or whether there will be jobs lost. But in any case, the quality of life should be central. And if technology can help advance that, great. But if we have transitional challenges, we have to look at those as well. And then lastly, I said a few words about it before, but I think the question of the privatization of the rule of law. How are we going to ensure checks and balances across borders? How are we going to make sure that it's not algorithms dictating what norms are? How do we ensure basic principles like oversight, fair competition, checks and balances, access to information, freedom of expression? It sounds simple, but getting that done is extremely complicated. And I worry about the pace of technology vis-a-vis the pace of democratic decision making. And therefore, we have to be more ambitious in getting going in any case. I saw two questions here. Miriam?
Thank you. I work for the Committee on International Trade, so therefore my question would look at this from trade perspective, if I may. And I would like to continue on the issue of data localization. I'm sure it's addressed in the report. I'm not sure whether you looked at it also from the perspective of its potential as a trade barrier. And I know this is what Marietje works on also in the committee. But would you, for example, consider inspiring the Commission to address this as a trade barrier on the WTO level? Okay.
Well, the formula also from my side is that we've been a global commission. Accordingly, we haven't also been, we are not very European or European specific in our recommendations. So Marietje can probably answer that question from her particular point of view, and I'm quite certain I would agree with that one, by the way, because I suspect what she's going to say. But our basic approach is very much open, free, secure. And from that follows, of course, that we see the risk of digital protectionism, be that coming from the one part of the world or the other part of the world, being a clearly negative factor. TPP, whatever's going to happen with that, includes provisions that I think are quite forward-looking in these areas.
Just briefly, we see a lot of focus on the area of technology and trade and the overlap, and some people, particularly in civil society, are quite afraid that trade rules may restrict the open character of the internet and the freedom of the people using it. And that would never be my intention, and I think we have to address it. Where I think it can be interesting is, if, for example, in data localization, or, for example, massive censorship, which often serves a political purpose first, but also has implications for commercial relations and trade. And so sometimes pointing to the economic impact is just a different way, and sometimes more effective way, of using political weight and leadership from the EU to address some of these issues beyond just the fact that it violates human rights, for example, or has other negative implications. So I'm in favor of looking at this angle, but also being very clear where trade does and does not have relevance for the internet. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Zoltan Prycini with Symantec. And I would like to ask questions to both of you on two points. First of all, I'm very sensitive to the point you made about the importance of not tampering with protective technologies. This is something which we as a company adhere to and publicly endorse as a principle that we apply to all our technologies. We, for example, very much welcomed when Europol and ENISA adopted a joint statement a couple of months ago, which said much the same thing: backdoors into things like encryption would be harmful in the longer term and should be avoided, other avenues should be explored. We actually even went a step further, and in a recent publication of the NATO Center of Excellence for Cooperative Cyber Defense, we published an article as Symantec on a principle which we'd like to call the principle of technology integrity. and that would be the idea that nobody should force the compromise or the weakening of protective technologies, or any technologies for that matter, and we would like to see in the longer term this principle to evolve towards something like a cyber norm which nations would respect in the legislations they adopt and in the executive measures that they take. Now the question to you is, do you think that this principle has any chance of making it into discussions, for example, at the UN GGE level or beyond? Which countries would be prepared to carry that, and is there a chance that this one day becomes reality? Because let's face it, it's in the interest of individuals. Every one of us needs these technologies to protect themselves, and if we weaken them by design, that's not in anybody's interest. But we, as industry players and technology vendors, also need some sort of air cover, some sort of legal ground to say no to requests or instructions to weaken our technologies. So far, Symantec has managed to do that. We would like to keep doing that moving forward, and we would welcome, let's say, support in that at the international level. And related to that also, coming back to the other question of trade, there are very interesting discussions going on currently, as you all know, about the export controls of dual-use technologies, on the understanding that, unfortunately, most digital technologies are very easy to use in fashions which are different from the ones for which they were designed, making them de facto very easily dual-use. How do we address that issue while ensuring that sort of mutual dependence between the security that we need to protect all those rights and those rights without which the security cannot be accountable? Thank you.
Well, the first aspect of your question, you will find that there is carefully drafted language in the report, because we had a discussion about these issues. There have, of course, been cases where governments have been doing things that sort of violate the principles that you allude to. They have been doing it in